My hands are bruised, the iron chains biting into my wrists. And as I look at you huddled in the shadows of this damp cell, I know the bitter truth. We are going to die. I do not say that to bring you more terror, because fear is already breathing down our necks. I say it because death is the one cup we all must drink. Yet as we sit here waiting for the guards, I realize how unprepared we truly are. The elders spoke of the end, but often in vague whispers. Today, you and I are going to look straight at the ancient scrolls together. We will not settle for empty comforts or blurry dreams of a silent, sleeping soul. When the executioner raises his blade, what happens in that exact, irreversible second? Paul wrote to the Philippians from chains just like ours, saying he longed to depart and be with the Messiah, declaring it was far better. Not a long, unconscious sleep, but a sudden, vivid reality. Paul did not mean better after centuries in the cold dirt. He meant immediately. I close my eyes and think of the Master on the Roman cross, his lungs failing, the crowd stripping his identity away, just as they do to us. The thief beside him had no time for deep teaching, only a desperate plea to be remembered. The Master did not promise a blurry future. He promised him today, "You will be with me in paradise today." That single word echoes in my mind, keeping the terror at bay as I wait in this darkness. The truth the scribes so often overlook is right here. Death for us is not a violent door into an endless, quiet dark. It is no unconscious void where we lose our names. It is an immediate, fully awake transition. Let us trace these promises together, step by step, and discover what truly leaves this bruised flesh the moment the breathing stops. We need to uncover who will actually meet us in the shadows of the arena. I have read the visions from the island of Patmos, describing what our martyred brothers and sisters are doing right now, awake and crying out before the throne. I will share a promise hidden in these scrolls, so vivid it will alter how you face tomorrow. But first, you and I must answer a terrifying question. As the empire tries to erase our names and our faith, what exactly are we made of? What happens to the very core of your mind? Your memories, the piece of you that remembers your mother's face, the instant your body is broken. Listen closely to me. And commit this to memory, because others hiding in these catacombs need to hear it too. Do not let these words fade. Share this hope. The Romans think death is simple, that the blood spills, the body breaks, and the man simply ceases to exist. But they are entirely wrong. The sacred writings refuse to let us drown in that shallow despair. Before we can endure the trials awaiting us at dawn, you must understand what you truly are. Forget what the pagan philosophers shout in the markets. The scrolls declare an unmistakable truth. You are not just a frail body that happens to hold a fleeting spirit. You are a soul. A living, conscious, eternal flame that is only wearing this fragile temporary shell. That changes everything. Think back to the garden in the beginning. The ancient text tells us the Creator shaped man from dust. There he lay upon the dirt, complete, perfectly formed, yet cold and entirely lifeless. He was nothing but clay until the breath of life filled his lungs. That divine breath, that spark of heaven, is what made the dust wake up. Our true self is that breath, the invisible flame that animated the dirt. Now, remember the wisdom of Solomon in the scrolls. Solomon wrote about our final hour with a precision that makes my breath catch. He said the dust returns to the earth, but the spirit returns to the one who gave it. Two distinct paths. My bruised flesh will stay in this prison, but my true self will soar. Death is not the end of our existence. It is a tearing apart of flesh and spirit. Some whisper about soul sleep, claiming the dead simply vanish into a deep, silent rest, unaware, floating in the dark until the resurrection. It sounds peaceful, but this false comfort contradicts the true biblical afterlife. A dormant soul cannot desperately long to be with the Messiah. A silent phantom cannot experience the immediate joy Paul wrote about or enter paradise today. Their words promised vivid, waking life. We will step into an awareness so blindingly real, it makes this stone cell feel like a mere shadow. He reminded the scattered tribes that the body without the spirit is dead. As I sit here tracing the scars on my arms, that truth anchors my frantic mind. The spirit is not created by my beating heart. It does not bleed when the Roman whip strikes. The spirit is what forces this frail flesh to move. When the final strike falls tomorrow, this broken body will not drag me down into the dirt with it. I will leave it behind. The man I am, carrying every memory, every tear, my unshakable identity in the Messiah, will depart. This physical form is just a crumbling tent. And the tenant is simply moving out. You might be wondering, moving where? Into what strange land? The ancient scrolls map out that departure vividly, but sit with this thought in the darkness for a moment. If your true self is not the blood and bone they threaten to destroy, then slipping away from this flesh is not an alien, terrifying loss. It is a return to what you were always meant to be. This flesh was only ever a temporary shelter. The breath the Creator exhaled into the garden dirt was entirely eternal. And the executioner's blade cannot kill what heaven breathed into existence. The letter to the Hebrews warns that man is appointed to die once, and then face the holy throne. An appointment, not a random tragedy, not an endless silence. Our final hour has been sovereignly scheduled. And for those of us who have staked our very lives on the risen Christ, what happens in that violent severing is not a lonely stumble into the void. We do not make the terrifying crossing by ourselves. Luke's scroll records a detail about who comes to carry us that leaves me weeping with relief every time I read it. When you realize who will be waiting to catch you the instant your heart stops, the dread of tomorrow's arena loses its power. No emperor's decree can delay that final moment. But as my lungs take their last ragged breath, I know I will not be walking into eternity alone. I sit alone in the dust of this ancient gate, my identity slipping away with every shallow breath, utterly terrified of the cold void of death. But the sacred scrolls whisper a completely different reality. Have you ever wondered what happens in that terrifying fraction of a second when we finally cross over? You and I will not cross alone. The scriptures tell us of a man named Lazarus. This is not some poetic parable, but a real man with a real name and real suffering. When his lungs emptied for the final time, he did not drift blindly into the lonely dark. The text explicitly says he was carried by angels. Not wandering, not floating helplessly. He was physically escorted by heavenly messengers, sent to protect him from the shadows, sent to ensure he made it safely across. I looked down at my ragged hands, feeling the crushing loneliness of a life forgotten by the world. Lazarus was just like me, a broken beggar longing for crumbs. A sick and invisible man that society stepped over without a passing glance. Yet in his final terrifying moment of loss, heaven dispatched angels specifically for him. This realization shakes me to my core. If the Creator assigned a majestic royal guard for a nameless outcast, what has He prepared for us? The ancient text uses a word for carried that means to be lifted up with overwhelming tender care. Not dragged into the abyss, but gently gathered. The exact same God who counted every hair on my weary head has mapped out every step of my departure. Hebrews chapter 1 calls them ministering spirits, sent on fierce and active duty. In the heavy silence of the night, I can almost hear the clash of unseen armies. These angels are not just beautiful statues standing passively in eternal halls. They are fierce servants dispatched on very specific, dangerous assignments. And their most critical mission is the moment of our death. I feel the constant temptation to believe death is just a peaceful transition. But Paul warns us in Ephesians chapter 6 that our true battle is against the dark rulers of this age. The air around me feels thick with hostile forces, desperate to strip away my fragile faith. Why would the enemy, who has tormented me with brutal isolation and doubt my entire life, simply step aside when I take my final breath? The spiritual war raging for my eternal soul does not pause at the dark threshold of eternity. The terror of losing myself completely grips me. But I hold desperately onto this truth. The heavenly escort is my shield. It is a fierce declaration of divine ownership. When I read Daniel chapter 10, I tremble knowing that even a mighty angel was delayed by the demonic prince of Persia. If dark forces can resist heaven itself, my crossing is no mere formality. It is God thundering into the void, declaring that I belong to Him and cannot be touched. Psalm 91 promises He commands His angels to guard all my ways, even the terrifying final one. I think of Jude verse 9, where the archangel Michael battled the devil for the very body of Moses. The unseen world is violently real, but I will cross the threshold under the absolute, unyielding protection of the Most High's messengers. I stare into the dying embers of my fire, feeling the heavy burden of my flesh, and a burning question consumes my mind. If I am carried by angels through this hostile dark, what exactly awaits me on the other side? Paul spoke of being absent from the body and present with the Lord. He described it with such agonizing longing that he was torn between enduring this brutal life and departing. You do not speak of death like that if it is just a cold, unconscious sleep. You speak like that when you have seen something so overwhelmingly glorious that the fears and pains of this world completely vanish. He caught a glimpse of absolute paradise, a reality so profound that the terrible pressure of losing my earthly identity barely matters compared to the promise of His immediate presence. The words of 2 Corinthians chapter 5 echo in my mind, challenging every fear of abandonment I have ever known. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. There is no desolate waiting room, no silent sleep in the cold earth. In the fraction of a second my soul leaves this fragile shell, I am immediately and completely with Him. The ancient word Paul used for present means to finally be at home among your own people. It means I am not drifting into some formal, distant court as a terrified stranger. It is the breathtaking realization of arrival. I have spent my whole life feeling entirely homeless, wandering desperately through this ancient dust, but my tired soul was never meant to stay here. When this temporary tent finally collapses, I am truly going home. Everything connects to the overwhelming truth Paul penned in Philippians chapter 1. He desperately desired to depart and be with Christ, calling it far better. He stacked two absolute extremes of language together, because normal human words simply shatter under the weight of that coming glory. It is a magnificent reality that makes my current suffering look like a passing shadow. But the most intimate promise came from Jesus Himself, spoken in the absolute worst agony imaginable. Hanging there bleeding and dying, He did not offer vague comfort to the terrified thief beside Him. He made a vow so impossibly precise in its timing that it cannot be spiritualized away or pushed into some distant future. It obliterates my deep fear of the dark. Today, you will be with me in paradise. I sit in the damp cold of this hiding place, trembling, feeling the pressure of the empire trying to erase who we are. Sometimes the loneliness is suffocating, and the temptation to renounce it all whispers in my ear. But then I remember the account in Luke, chapter 23. The master looked at a dying criminal beside him, a man with no time for rituals, just one desperate cry. The master promised, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Not tomorrow, today. I cling to that Greek word paradisos. It means a royal garden, a place of extraordinary beauty and close access to the King. Paul echoes this in 2 Corinthians and Philippians. Our destination is immediate. When I think of this, it changes everything about the darkness we face right now. The fear of the executioner's blade haunts my dreams, threatening to strip away my courage. But the letters from Paul remind me that if we belong to the Spirit, we do not step into silence or darkness when our final breath leaves us. We are carried immediately into the very presence of the Lord. Listen to me, there is a false whisper spreading among the frightened. A rumor that we must suffer some shadowy purification after we die before we can see God. But I tell you that is a lie. Paul never spoke of a holding cell. He said to be absent from this broken, weary body is to be present with the Lord. Our purification was already finished on the cross. We do not earn our way into the light through more suffering. The blood of the Master is completely sufficient, once and for all. I have lost so many I love to the cruelty of this world. My heart aches with a loneliness that feels entirely unbearable. But I remind myself that when we cross over, we do not arrive trembling, hoping we have suffered enough. We arrive wrapped in His righteousness alone. You and I must hold tightly to this, because it changes how we face the terror of tomorrow. Think of the brothers and sisters who were taken from us last night. They are not sleeping in some forgotten silent tomb. They are awake. They are alive. They are with the Lord. They have simply walked into a brilliant room that we cannot enter just yet. The separation tears at my soul, but I know the one who holds the key knows my name. Paul called this departure far better than the fear and shadows we endure here. But in the long, quiet watches of the night, when the doubt creeps in and threatens to steal my faith, I am tormented by a lingering question. What exactly will happen when my time comes? What will my eyes actually see when the Roman sword falls? What will I hear? Who will I recognize in that first blinding moment? Everything we hold onto builds toward this singular threshold. The sudden tearing of the soul from the flesh, the escort of angels, the immediate arrival before the King. It all circles back to the question that burns in my chest. The one the Master answered with that one beautiful word today. I need to know what our fallen friends are experiencing right now. Not in vague shadows, but in absolute, concrete reality. What are they doing on the other side of this brutal life? I recently read John's scroll from the island of Patmos, the 6th chapter, starting at the 9th verse, and it felt like a heavy door swinging open in my mind. The scriptures do not go silent when the breathing stops. John saw a vision beneath the altar of God. He saw the souls of those slaughtered for holding onto the truth, people just like us. And they were not asleep. They were crying out with a loud, desperate voice, asking the Lord how long until He judged the earth and avenged their innocent blood. And the Almighty spoke to them personally. He handed each of them a glowing white robe and told them to rest just a little longer. It brings tears to my eyes. They are awake, fully aware of our suffering and speaking directly with the living God. To know they remember what happened to them here gives me a strange courage. They have not been erased. That is my deepest fear in this dark place, that the empire will execute me and wipe my name from the earth forever. But the martyrs remember, they long for justice. They are clothed in glory, far more alive and truly themselves than I am right now, trapped in this exhausted body. I turn to the 12th chapter of Hebrews, starting at verse 22, and the words are staggering. It speaks to us in the present tense, saying we have already come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem. It tells us of an uncountable gathering of angels. Just slowly let those words wash over your weary spirit. Thousands of angels gathered in a massive, joyful celebration. That word celebration cuts through the gloom of my daily survival. Heaven is not a solemn corridor. It is a roaring, joyful assembly, and the writer insists we are enrolled in it. We are not forgotten outcasts. The scroll speaks of the spirits of the righteous made perfect. That phrase echoes the final breath of our Lord when he declared, "It is finished." The painful process of this life is entirely completed for them. Their standing before God is secure. But as I sit here shivering, grieving the loss of my family, my heart asks one desperate question. Will I recognize them when I cross over? Will the bonds we forged in this terrifying world mean anything there? For the answer, I turn to the 9th chapter of Luke, reading about the Transfiguration. I stood on that mountain in Galilee, trembling as the veil of the world tore open. Jesus stood in blazing light, and suddenly 2 men were with him, Moses and Elijah. They had been gone for centuries, yet I knew them instantly. My heart pounded, terrified by the mystery but anchored by a sudden, unshakable truth. Death had not erased them. Moses was still Moses, Elijah was still Elijah. They spoke of the great exodus Jesus was about to accomplish, fully alive, fully themselves. In this dark hour, when the empire tries to strip away my name and crush my faith, I cling to that blinding vision. If I fall to the sword tomorrow, I know I will not dissolve into some nameless, empty mist. My name, my story, and the deep love I carry for the brethren I leave behind, all of it will survive the crossing. You and I have both stared into the dark, wondering if the ones we lost still remember us. Paul knew this terrifying isolation, and he answered it. He called the believers his hope, his joy, his crown of boasting when the Lord returns. He expected to stand right beside them, looking into their familiar eyes. He knew the grave could not shatter our bonds. And there is a deeper mystery here, one that brings me to my knees when the loneliness feels too heavy. Remember the revelation given to John. The martyrs, the souls waiting beneath the altar, crying out for justice. God gives them white robes and tells them to rest until the full number of their brethren is complete. They know we are still here. They are watching our struggle, waiting for us to finish the race. We are not forgotten by heaven. Those souls are not sleeping in the dust. They are crying out, worshiping in an assembly so vast and blindingly beautiful that John fell as though dead when he saw the risen Lord. When my faith falters, when the cold of this hiding place seeps into my bones, I force myself to see that city. We are not marching toward a silent void. We are walking toward the city of the living God, toward thousands of angels, toward the very same Jesus who looked at a dying, desperate thief and promised him paradise before the sun set. That is the promise that holds me together when the terror whispers in my ear. But all of this beauty, the angels, the conscious reunion, the face of Christ, it demands something terrifying of us right now. It forces a piercing question into the center of my shivering heart, and yours too. Are we truly ready for that violent, glorious crossing? I do not mean knowing the ancient scrolls or keeping the outward traditions. When the darkness closes in, are you spiritually prepared to step through the veil? Because that moment is rushing toward us. We have walked these mysteries together. And I share this because it is the only thing keeping me from breaking under the pressure of this brutal empire. Seeing the truth of what lies beyond the grave is not some idle comfort, it is armor. The believer who knows that angels are waiting to guide them, that their true identity cannot be burned away, stands differential why when the world turns against us. When I anchor my soul to that absolute truth, the threats of men lose their teeth. We face the fire differently. We grieve our dead differently. We endure the unendurable. My hands are empty of the things this world values, but my grip on the world to come is fierce. Paul wrote to us in our darkest days, proving the resurrection, and he left us with a battle cry. He told us to stand firm, to let absolutely nothing move us. He was not writing a soft poem for peaceful times. He was writing to believers like me, hunted, exhausted, and constantly tempted to soften our convictions just to survive another week. The empire wants us to blend in, to bow down and simply fade away. But Paul knew that if we remember the glory prepared for us, we can survive the arena. The writer of Hebrews tells us to hold unswervingly to our hope. When the loneliness screams at me in the dead of night, I cling to those holy words like a drowning man. Holding unswervingly means gripping that promise so fiercely that no earthly terror can pry it from your bleeding hands. I hold on through the shattering loss, through seasons when the heavens feel like brass and the enemy whispers that I am entirely alone. The deceiver knows our frailty. He knows that if my vision of eternity grows blurry, I will break when pressure rises. His greatest weapon against us has never been the sword or the lions. It is the slow, quiet erosion of our certainty. It is the subtle temptation to compromise just a little to save our lives. That is why these sacred writings are my lifeblood. The Maker of the heavens did not leave me to wander in the dark, guessing at what happens when my heart stops. He gave us ironclad promises to anchor our wandering, terrified souls. He did not abandon me to the empty comfort of philosophy or wishful thinking. His word declares that what waits for me is not a silent void. It is the very presence of God. It is the healing of every wound this broken world has inflicted. I hear the voice of Jesus echoing, commanding me to be faithful even to the point of death. Not just faithful when it is easy, but faithful when the executioner raises his hand. Because on the other side of that final breath, a victor's crown is waiting. It will be given to me personally by the Lord who wore a bleeding crown of thorns, so I never die alone. That is the promise I stake my fragile life upon. And it is this unshakable, death-defying certainty that gives a trembling captive like me the courage to finally face the dawn. Have you ever felt the cold blade of fear against your faith, forcing you to choose between your life and your soul? You and I need to strip away the crowds. I speak not as a temple scribe, but as a wanderer whose feet are stained with the dust of Judea. These promises only anchor us if our surrender is absolute. Not a half-hearted allegiance to appease the empire, but a total yielding to the Nazarene. I know the crushing loneliness of standing apart, the temptation to blend in and lose my identity just to survive. But my hope rests entirely in the one who paid my ransom. If you hold this truth, the angels stand guard. The promised land awaits, but if your heart trembles in the dark, if the desert winds of doubt are howling, and you wonder if you truly belong to Him, listen to my voice right now. I can still hear the agonizing gasps from the cross, where a dying thief found mercy in his final hour. The same Jesus who turned to that criminal and promised him paradise is looking directly at you. His invitation cuts through the silence of our lonely exiles. It demands no temple rituals, only a broken, honest surrender. I have felt the heavy chains of my own failures, the terrifying reality that I cannot reach a holy God alone. But the Son of Man absorbed the wrath we earned, and the stone was rolled away on the third day to prove death had lost its sting. He offers His spotless robe in exchange for your ruined life. If the hunger inside you aches for this truth, do not wait for the morning sun. The hour is now. Speak to Him from the depths of your shattered heart. Confess to the Maker that you carry the weight of your transgressions. Tell Him you believe the Nazarene bled for you and conquered the grave. Surrender to Him, not as a merchant trading coins, but as a prisoner kneeling before a love so fierce it faced the cross. If you make this vow today, do not hide in the shadows. Step into the light and declare it in the comments, typing, "I accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior of my life." A comment does not save your soul, but planting that public stake shatters the fear of losing who you are. If this message pierced your darkness and brought clarity to your wandering spirit, press the like button. Tell us what truth struck you deepest. And subscribe to this fellowship, as we boldly uncover the scriptures every single week. We dig into these ancient words to forge an unshakable, death-defying trust. I know the sheer terror of walking this road, the bitter sting of losing everything, and the heavy temptation to simply give up the fight. But this faith is the only compass that will carry us through the barren wasteland and guide us all the way home. Because that is exactly where we are marching. You and I, we are heading home to the grand city of the living God. I can almost see the gates, surrounded by an endless host of angels. We are walking directly into the glorious presence of the Nazarene. He is the one who made the vow. He remains steadfast when all others abandon us. He is waiting at the threshold, and he will never let a single one of his children walk through those eternal gates alone.